We welcome you back to the show this morning, the second half of the show, News and Views this morning with myself, Inayat Wadi, as we stay in the company of our Salam media listeners, our viewers, and also One Nation 88.9 FM out of Polokwane with us and looking ahead at the show the next uh, 45 minutes or so. We're going to be focusing on South Africa, looking at our position, a neutral position in the Ukraine Russian conflict. What does this actually mean? We also will be looking ahead at the visit of Janet Yellen, U.S. Treasury Secretary, to meet Cyril Ramaphosa on her South African trip. Ashraf Patel, senior researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue, will be unpacking and also defend our democracy, talking about a public rally on February the 8th. And the rally is entitled A Country in Crisis, the Real State of the Nation. Now, this comes on the eve of the opening of Parliament and the Presidential State of the Nation address, the SONA. So this is going to be quite important considering where we are and looking at the state of joblessness in the country, the ongoing corruption, the state capture, acts of sabotage, and also criminal networks across various sectors. And the big one, the big elephant in the room, has been ESCOM and the load shedding. But right now, we're going across to be joined by Professor Malte, Brosig, Professor in International Relations at Wits University, unpacking South Africa and its continuation of adopting a neutral stance in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where South Africa has refused to condemn Moscow and its invasion, but continues for dialogue to try and resolve the issue. Professor Malte, good morning to you, sir, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, wonderful you're able to join us now. We've seen South African position has been one of neutrality all along, and at the same time, the latest development has been criticism that has been leveled against South Africa, a decision to hold military exercises next month with Russia and China. Now, we know that South Africa for a long time has enjoyed relationships with Russia through the non-aligned movement, through initiatives like BRICS, and also the support in the past that the ANC government had received from Russia. Do you think these could be some of the major reasons why South Africa continues to adopt this neutral position?
Yeah, well, we have to talk about neutrality. So it looks a bit more like a punctuated neutrality. So of course, South Africa is not part of the war. It doesn't supply weapons, arms to any party. It's not directly engaged. That's very clear. But as you said, the country didn't condemn the invasion, but they said in last year, March, we do not condone the invasion. And it's also, I mean, what you pointed out is important that, of course, South Africa, as a non-Western country, also tries to, find its own line. And the BRICS coalition, of course, also plays in here. But it's one thing to meet a Russian delegation at a multilateral forum, or inviting it to your own country for military exercise.
Yes. Now, just looking at the global position and where South Africa fits in globally against the likes of the United States, for instance, because we know that the United States will always adopt the stance and the position, Prof, about or express its concerns about any country that would enjoy some sort of a relationship with Russia.
When it comes to the question of sanctions, I mean, that can be a tricky one. And we have seen that the Americans were pretty hard also with China, where they said that okay, if I mean, this was more informally. So many Chinese companies are not doing that much business with Russia anymore. And I think this is because of the threat of secondary sanctions in here. However, when it comes to trade relations between Russia and South Africa, they are not that small, but they also, it is less than $1 billion in terms of trade that's going on between the two countries. So there is no real significant fallout from any kind of potential sanctions.
Yes. Now, South Africa obviously needs to assess and look at our own position in terms of how this is going to benefit the country, in terms of how the relationship with a country like Russia, and also at the same time assessing how this is going to impact on our relationship with the rest of the world, including the United States, including the likes of Europe. And also the point I had made earlier, the long historical ties that date back at the time of apartheid in South Africa, the support that the ANC government has received in the past from the likes of Russia and all the other benefits as far as BRICS is concerned. So these ties, South Africa, it's a fine line to draw, Professor, but at the end of the day, this is absolutely important. This is crucial.
And you're absolutely right in pointing out that, of course, these days countries very often follow a policy of multi-alignment, so there are different poles and on centers of power in the world. And it's actually quite smart that you don't annoy your most important partners too much, and find a position that is reconcilable with one another. Claiming that neutrality, having them as military exercise, so that will raise some eyebrows somewhere, obviously.
Yes. Now, also looking at South Africa internally, and we've seen the ANC government come under fire and it's come under criticism even from the likes of the official opposition in South Africa, where they've been vocal to the neutral stance that the government has adopted, and to the extent that the leader of the DA has made a statement that we are already involved in this war. Our government can't be seen to be supporting Russian aggression and saying, let's put the country before the party politics. Now, how do you actually read into this where we're getting even mixed signals coming through from within South Africa?
hmm I wouldn't formulate it that strongly, actually, but I'm also not the opposition leader. Um, for internationally, it is very much seen that South Africa is more or less siding with Russia. And the question is, what consequences will this be about, and what, for instance, or how is South Africa profiting from a closer friendship with Russia? I mean, these are the questions that one should ask, and then look in what answers there are. I mean, in terms of trade relations, they are not that important here, and the biggest export-import markets and technology transfer still with the European Union and with the U.S. in addition to China. However, I mean, countries do make up their own foreign policy independently, and I do not, and that would be the other question maybe, I would not expect that the U.S. is doing some serious arm twisting with South Africa, for instance, that it should leave BRICS, for example, or something like this. This is rather not so likely to happen.
Yes, and also in the past, we've seen Cyril Ramaphosa meet up with the U.S. President Joe Biden discussing this particular issue. And this is going to be quite interesting because later on in the program, we are talking about the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who will be meeting Cyril Ramaphosa on a South African trip. And I'm sure this is a matter that is going to come up with regard to South Africa, and also looking at this relationship. But again, will the U.S. Use its muscle to force South Africa's hand, Prof?
Um, I don't think this will happen in a serious manner. Right? As I see U.S. South African relations is that the Biden government still wants to gain back ground on the African continent. When you remember the statements that President Trump was making over African countries, they were not very charming, actually. So, and I don't really see what the U.S. would gain in pressuring South Africa. Actually, I mean, it might cause a backlash also in the wider region, right? So it wouldn't be very smart.
Well, certainly. And also, we know that not only South Africa, Prof, but Africa in general, there is this scramble for Africa by the United States, by the Europeans, the Chinese, the Russians. Everyone has some sort of interest in Africa in making an impact and getting a Africa. So, one should also put that at the forefront of our minds that there is this huge interest. But what is more important is for countries like South Africa and even other African countries, how they position themselves and how the continent itself will be benefiting from this interest and the scramble on the African continent.
That's absolutely right, and that's a situation that we've seen is building up for a couple of years now. So that in the time of multipolarity, we have different centers: the European Union, you might mention the U.S., China, but also other regional and emerging countries are playing. The Gulf countries, for example, playing also a quite important role. And I think a smart foreign policy is trying to, take advantage of the opportunities that emerge out of these. This diversity of.
Yes, Prof. Well, Prof, we need to have to leave it at that. And as always, we do appreciate you taking time out, talking to us this morning, and for your participation on the show. We appreciate your time. We wish you well, and all the best to you.
My pleasure.
Professor Malte Brosig, Professor in International Relations at Wits University, was us this morning on the neutrality of South Africa in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. We're going to go for a break. We'll be joined by Ashraf Patel next, senior researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue, Janet Yellen, U.S. Treasury Secretary General, to meet with Cyril Ramaphosa.